Somewhere beneath your feet, right now, there may be 50,000 men. Not metaphorically, not in legend, literally, 50,000 human beings, soldiers, commanders, scouts, men with names and families and gods they prayed to, who marched into the Egyptian desert one morning in 524 BC and simply ceased to exist. No screams were recorded. No survivors crawled back. No letters arrived home. No Persian general filed a report. No Egyptian scribe noted a battle. No bones were claimed. No graves were dug. The greatest army the ancient world had ever sent into. That desert walked in, and the desert swallowed them whole. What you are looking at is one of the most hostile landscapes on Earth. Temperatures here exceed 50 degrees Celsius. The wind can build walls of sand 60 meters high in a matter of minutes. There is no water. There are no landmarks. In the wrong season, this desert doesn't just kill you, it erases you. It buries you so completely that 2,500 years later, archaeologists with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar still cannot find a single confirmed trace of what happened here. And yet, the story was recorded. A man wrote it down. His name was Herodotus, the Greek historian, the father of history. And what he described was not a skirmish, not a battle, not a retreat. He described the complete, total, and absolute annihilation of 50,000 Persian soldiers by a wall of sand. But here is the question, the one question that has haunted historians, archaeologists, and explorers for 25 centuries. If 50,000 men truly died in this desert, where are they? And if they didn't die here, then where did they go? To understand the answer, we have to go back to the beginning, back to the most powerful man in the world, back to a king so dangerous, so paranoid, and so consumed by rage that he sent 50,000 men to silence a god. His name was Cambyses II, and he was the son of a legend. His father, Cyrus the Great, had built the Achaemenid Persian Empire from near nothing into the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from modern-day Turkey to the borders of India, from Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean. When Cyrus died in 530 BC, he left his son a kingdom so vast that its borders touched 3 continents. Cambyses did not squander this inheritance. In fact, he extended it. In 525 BC, just 5 years after ascending the throne, Cambyses II launched a military campaign against Egypt, the jewel of the ancient world, the land of the Nile, the civilization that had endured for 3,000 years. His army descended on Egypt's northern border at the Battle of Pelusium. The Egyptians, facing the most professional military machine on the planet, collapsed. Pharaoh Psamtik III, the last of the native pharaohs, was captured, humiliated, and sent into exile. In a single campaign season, Cambyses had done what no foreign conqueror had done in a generation. He had broken Egypt. But conquest was not enough for Cambyses. He wanted legitimacy. To rule Egypt was one thing. To be recognized as the rightful pharaoh, the god-king, the chosen of the gods, was another entirely. And in the ancient world, there was one place whose word could grant or deny that divine recognition: the Oracle of Amun at Siwa. The Oracle of Amun was not just a religious institution, it was a political weapon. Its pronouncements could make or break kings. Centuries later, Alexander the Great himself would make the treacherous journey to Siwa specifically to ask the oracle whether he was the son of a god. When the oracle said yes, Alexander's authority across Egypt became unquestionable. But the oracle had no such blessing for Cambyses. The priests of Amun refused him. Whether they denied him divine legitimacy, insulted his claim, or simply would not cooperate with a Persian conqueror, the details are lost. What we do know, from Herodotus and from the behavioral pattern of Cambyses' entire Egyptian campaign, is that the king did not respond to rejection with diplomacy. He responded with fury. Ancient sources paint a disturbing portrait of Cambyses II in Egypt. Herodotus describes him as a man teetering on the edge of madness, or perhaps already fallen over it. He reportedly stabbed the sacred Apis bull, the living embodiment of the god Ptah, laughing as it bled to death in the temple. He ordered the exhumation and desecration of royal Egyptian mummies. He mocked Egyptian priests, burned their temples, and treated their gods as theater. Modern historians are divided on how much of this to believe. The Egyptians, who wrote their own history on their own walls, had every reason to portray their Persian conqueror as a monster. Herodotus himself, writing nearly a century after the events, was working from second-hand accounts, many of them Egyptian. Some scholars believe that Cambyses was not mad at all, but a cold, calculating king whose ruthlessness was deliberately weaponized as propaganda against him by the very priests he had humiliated. But here is what we know for certain. When the priests of Amun at Siwa refused to legitimize Cambyses, his response was to dispatch an army to destroy them, not negotiate, not send a diplomat, not issue a warning. He pointed 50,000 soldiers at a temple in the middle of a desert and gave them a single order: burn it to the ground. Let us stop here. Let us actually think about what 50,000 soldiers means. Not abstractly, concretely. A modern NFL stadium holds around 70,000 people. Now empty that stadium by 20,000. Those remaining people, that crowd, that is the Persian army that marched west from Thebes in 524 BC. Now imagine feeding them every single day in a desert, in summer. At the bare minimum of survival level hydration, just 3 liters of water per person per day, this army required 150,000 liters of water daily. The journey from Thebes to Siwa, across the route Herodotus implies they took, was approximately 800 kilometers through open desert, at a reasonable marching pace of 30 kilometers per day. That is nearly a month of travel, in some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, carrying every supply on their backs or on animals that also required water and food. The army would have needed an almost incomprehensible logistical operation: pre-positioned supply caches, water sources mapped in advance, allied tribes ensuring safe passage. They were marching through foreign territory, desert territory, land where most of the men had never set foot. The Persians were from the Iranian plateau. The Medes, the Greeks, the Scythians in the column, none of them knew this desert. Herodotus tells us that the army made it to a place called the Island of the Blessed, Oasis in Greek, a location roughly 7 days' march west of Thebes. This likely corresponds to one of the known oases in the western desert, Karga, or perhaps Dakla. Here they were last seen. Here, the last human eyes that would ever record their existence watched them continue west, into the deep desert, into the great sand sea, and disappear. After that, Herodotus writes something extraordinary. He writes that the Ammonians, the people of Siwa, later told the story of what happened next, and what they said was this: a great and violent south wind arose, which buried them in the masses of sand which it bore, and so they disappeared from sight. A sandstorm. The whole army buried in a sandstorm. Now, here is where this story fractures into something far more disturbing than a simple natural disaster. Because if you are a historian, if you are a trained, skeptical analyst of the ancient world, the moment you hear the phrase, "and so they disappeared from sight," your first question is not, how big was the storm? Your first question is, who is telling this story? The only people who claimed to witness the army's fate were the Ammonians, the very people the army was sent to destroy, the very priests who had refused to legitimize Cambyses. These priests, these supposed victims, are the sole source of the sandstorm account, and Herodotus, who recorded their words, never once questioned the convenience of that testimony. Think about that for a moment. The only eyewitness account of what killed 50,000 Persian soldiers came from the people those soldiers were marching to kill. For 25 centuries, historians have wrestled with 3 fundamentally different explanations for what happened to Cambyses' lost army. Each one is disturbing, each one is plausible, and each one, if true, rewrites a different piece of ancient history. The western desert of Egypt is not the Sahara you imagine from postcards. It is not merely hot and dry. It is geologically violent. The Great Sand Sea, a region of approximately 72,000 square kilometers of rolling dune fields along the Egypt-Libya border, generates some of the most extreme meteorological events on Earth. The Khamsin, a hot southern wind that blows between March and May, can generate sandstorms that reduce visibility to 0 in minutes. Temperatures inside a Khamsin can spike by 20 degrees Celsius in a matter of hours. Sand penetrates everything: eyes, lungs, water containers, food supplies. In 2009, 2 Italian archaeologists, brothers named Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, announced what they claimed was the first physical evidence of the lost army. Near Siwa, they had found scattered human bones, fragments of Persian-era weapons, a silver bracelet, and earrings consistent with the Persian period. They announced to the world that Herodotus had been right all along, that a catastrophic sandstorm had indeed swallowed the Persian army, and that the bones were slowly surfacing as the dunes shifted over 25 centuries. The announcement made global headlines. It was the kind of discovery that dreams are made of. Ancient mystery solved by modern archaeologists, history confirmed by bones in the sand. Except that Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most famous archaeologist and then Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, immediately issued a press release describing the claims as unfounded and misleading. Hawass pointed out that the Castiglione brothers had not been granted permission to excavate in Egypt, meaning anything they claimed to find had no legal or scientific standing. And critically, the discovery had been announced not in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, but in a documentary film. It also emerged that the Castiglione brothers had a history of sensationalism. They were the same filmmakers who had produced controversial shock documentaries in Africa in the 1970s, films that had been widely criticized for exploitation and fabrication. Their credibility in academic circles was essentially 0. The bones in the sand, for now, remain unverified. In 2015, a Dutch Egyptologist from the University of Leiden named Olaf Karper published a paper that fundamentally challenged the sandstorm narrative. Working from excavations at Dakhla Oasis, one of the oases the army likely passed through, Karper pieced together evidence for something far more dramatic than a weather event. He found evidence of a rebellion. During the period of Cambyses' invasion and occupation of Egypt, a native Egyptian pharaoh had risen up against Persian rule. His name was Petubastis III, a rebel king who had declared himself the true ruler of Egypt and was actively organizing resistance in the western desert, precisely along the route that Cambyses' army was marching. Karper's argument was stunning in its implication. The lost army was not swallowed by a sandstorm. It was ambushed. Petubastis III and his rebel forces, who knew the desert intimately, who controlled the oases and the water sources, who could disappear into the dunes and reappear at will, had lured 50,000 Persian soldiers into the deep desert and destroyed them. The sandstorm story, Karper argued, was invented afterward, not by Herodotus, not even by the Ammonians, but by Darius the Great, the Persian king who eventually suppressed Petubastis' rebellion and reconsolidated Persian power in Egypt. Darius had a powerful motive to erase the humiliation. 50,000 Persian soldiers defeated in battle by an Egyptian rebel was an existential propaganda crisis for the empire. But 50,000 soldiers swallowed by an act of God? That was simply fate. Nobody's fault. Nothing to be ashamed of. So the rebellion was erased from history. Petubastis III was airbrushed out of the official record, and the sandstorm was inserted in his place. Divine cover story that turned a military catastrophe into a cosmic mystery. This is why Darius's famous Behistun inscription, the great carved record of Persian history, the Rosetta Stone of the Achaemenid Empire, makes absolutely no mention of the lost army. Not a single word. The silence itself is the confession. There is a third possibility, and it is the one that skeptical historians find most compelling. The story is fundamentally exaggerated or partially fabricated, and the true events have been so distorted by 2.5 millennia of retelling that the original truth may be irretrievably lost. Herodotus, beloved, brilliant foundational Herodotus, was not a journalist. He was a storyteller. He collected accounts from sources across the Mediterranean world and compiled them into his histories. He was brilliant at identifying patterns and motivations, at understanding why people and civilizations behaved as they did. But he was also capable of passing along myths, propaganda, and exaggeration without sufficient scrutiny. He admits as much himself, in places. The number 50,000 may be a literary convention for a very large number. Ancient historians regularly inflated army sizes by enormous multiples, sometimes by factors of 10 or 20. The sandstorm may be a simplified retelling of a much more complex collapse. Poor logistics, disease, desertion, ambush, and starvation combining to destroy an army that was already dying before any storm arrived. And crucially, nobody else in the ancient world corroborated it. Not the Persians, not the Egyptians, not the Greeks stationed in Egypt. The only source is Herodotus, and his source was the Ammonians, a single chain of testimony across a century of oral transmission for the disappearance of 50,000 men. The story of the lost army has obsessed explorers, scientists, and adventurers for centuries, and it has never let them go. In January 1933, British military officer Orde Wingate, later famous as the leader of the Chindits in World War II, set out into the Libyan desert specifically to find Cambyses' army. He found nothing. In the 1980s, journalist Gary Chaffetz organized a 6-month expedition funded by Harvard University and the National Geographic Society. They deployed ground-penetrating radar, an ultralight aircraft, 20 Egyptian geologists, and $250,000 worth of equipment across 100 square kilometers of desert south of Baharia Oasis. They found ancient burial mounds, but the bones inside dated to 1500 BC, 1,000 years too early. They found a carved sphinx that might have been Persian. They found nothing definitive. Chaffetz was arrested when he returned to Cairo, accused of smuggling an aircraft into Egypt, even though he had written government permission. He was interrogated for 24 hours. The charges were dropped when he agreed to donate his aircraft to the Egyptian government. It now sits in the Egyptian War Museum with a caption identifying it as an Israeli spy plane. In 2000, a geological team from Helwan University, searching for petroleum in the Western Desert, stumbled upon something extraordinary: well-preserved fragments of ancient textiles, bits of metal resembling weapons, and human remains scattered across the sand. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities announced an expedition to investigate. Then silence. No follow-up. No results published. No explanation given for why the investigation appeared to stop. The desert keeps its secrets. Here is what makes this mystery uniquely, achingly haunting. It is not the mystery of a lost city, or a hidden treasure, or a sunken ship. It is the mystery of people, 50,000 people who had lives, who had been soldiers, perhaps unwillingly, conscripts from across the Persian Empire, men from Persia and Media and Greece and Scythia, dragged to the edge of the known world on the orders of a king they may have privately feared or despised. Men who perhaps muttered among themselves about the madness of crossing a desert to silence a foreign god in a foreign land. Men who, one morning in 524 BC, sat down for their midday meal somewhere in the deep Egyptian desert, and the sky turned brown, and nobody came for them, not their king, not their families, not history. Cambyses himself never reached Siwa. His campaign into Ethiopia, launched simultaneously with the army's westward march, was a disaster of its own. He ran out of food. His soldiers reportedly ate grass, then leather, then each other. He turned back from Ethiopia in failure. He never built his monument at Siwa. His attempted conquest of Carthage was abandoned before it began. He died in 522 BC, possibly of an infected wound, possibly of suicide, possibly, according to some ancient whispers, of assassination. He died without a confirmed heir, without a completed legacy, and without ever knowing what truly happened to the 50,000 men he had sent into the void. Darius the Great, his successor, consolidated the empire, crushed the rebellions, including the one that Kappa believes destroyed the army, and built Persepolis into one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. He never mentioned the lost army. He never explained the silence. And the desert, patient indifferent, eternal, kept its 50,000 dead. So the question remains. It has remained for 2,500 years. Were they swallowed by a storm so violent it consumed an army whole, and their bones still lie somewhere beneath those dunes, waiting for the right expedition, the right technology, the right shifting of sand to bring them to light? Were they ambushed by a rebel pharaoh, their slaughter covered up by an empire too proud to admit defeat, their memory deliberately erased from history by the very successors who inherited their fate? Or were they simply men, poorly supplied, poorly led, lost in a desert they never should have entered, who died, one by one, over days or weeks, scattered across hundreds of kilometers of sand, in numbers too dispersed and too chaotic for any single discovery to ever make sense of? We don't know. We may never know. And that is perhaps the most honest, most devastating thing that can be said about 50,000 human beings who disappeared from the face of history. The desert took them, and the desert has said nothing since.